Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for International Symposium on exploring the new dynamics of the Global South. How are developing countries proactively interacting with China? The JICA Ogata Research Institute has been conducting a research project named The New Dynamics of Peace and Development in the Indo-Pacific, How Countries in the Region Proactively Interact with China, to redefine the dynamics of peace and development in the Indo-Pacific region since 2022. This region has become a hotspot in the international arena in recent years, not only by the pandemic and climate change, but also due to shifting dynamism in the region that has a big presence in, so to speak, Global South. Observing geopolitical dynamism in the region, our research team sets the questions. The first, how will the existing international circumstances be transformed in the future? And two, how are developing countries in the region proactively interacting with bigger states and development partners? To address these research questions, we formed a multinational research team consisting of both Japanese and overseas academics to conduct case studies in 7 countries, namely the Philippines, Laos, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Uzbekistan, Serbia, and Zambia. In general, the international community, media, policymakers, and some academia argue that bigger and smaller countries have difficulties in establishing an equal relationship between them. And smaller countries have little negotiating power. In other words, the dominant view was that smaller countries are unable to demonstrate their agency vis-à-vis bigger powers. The unique point about this study is that it challenges such a big power-centered explanations and focuses on the proactive political will and the foreign policy of the developing countries. With emerging donors and rising powers, how have developing countries proactively formulated their policies vis-à-vis bigger states and donors? And how have they implemented their development and foreign policies for the sake of their own national targets? Exploring to answer those questions is very important for us to better understand today's global circumstances, which is likely to become increasingly complex in coming future. In this symposium, we invited 4 distinguished overseas scholars who are part of our research team to present case studies of the Philippines, Laos, Bangladesh, and Serbia to examine how these countries are taking ownership of bilateral relations to secure their own political and economic interests. I would like to take this opportunity to express our utmost gratitude to today's speakers, Professor Kamba, Professor Kuik, Professor Yasmin, and Professor Mitrovic, who have participated in these research projects and produced significant results. We are very pleased to have this opportunity to run reviews, analysis, and thoughts to deepen our understanding of the dynamic transformation of the region for peace and development. Once again, welcome everyone, and we look forward to active and inspiring discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miyahara. Next, let me invite Professor Akio Takahara for introduction of research project. Professor Takahara is a senior research advisor of JICA Ogata Research Institute and a professor at the University of Tokyo. Professor Takahara, please turn on your camera and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Orita-san, and thank you all for those who have taken the trouble to travel to the JICA Ichigaya building and those who are participating online. Now, let me briefly explain our project and the framework that we have used. As Miyahara-san just introduced to you, the basic idea is to analyze how the smaller countries are dealing with China. And the key word here is the word agency. You know, there has been a lot of talk about the global south or the relations between the global south and China. You know, there are lots of discussions about the so-called debt trap, etc. But I think in many cases, the viewpoint was from the bigger countries' side. But we thought that it's high time that we looked into how things look like from the smaller countries' point of view and check whether those countries have agency or not. Now, the word agency here is basically meant as the ability to decide on one's own actions, one's own behavior. So how are they proactively dealing with this big country, and in our case, in this project's case, China? And can you move to the next page, please? So the four-factor model was the original, the prototype of the framework that we use, the pentagonal model. Now, this prototype was developed through a project that the University of Tokyo organized with our international partners, looking into some countries' relations with China and focusing on four major areas. That is domestic politics of each country on the Chinese side, and the smaller countries side. We actually chose four countries then: Korea, then Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam. And we thought that the domestic politics of the countries were one important factor area. And also, naturally, economic interests count very much in those bilateral relations. Also, there is the international environment, security issues. Why are they put together? Because in East Asia, it's usually the United States factor, the America factor is the most important amongst the international environment factors. And the United States has military alliances with countries like South Korea, the Philippines, and so on. So we have put those two together as the third factor area. And the fourth, you know, it could surprise some people, but we thought that people's perceptions, emotions, their identity, you know, what kind of a country they would like to be or how they would like other countries to look at them. These questions about people's minds, how people feel, is also important when we look into and analyze the international relations in East Asia, especially Northeast Asia. So this is the prototype. And at the Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development, we have developed this model further to the pentagonal model that you see on the screen now. That is, domestic politics and the economy, they remain as important factors, but the others are divided into three areas. One is international relations, but international relations are separated into two. International relations in the region, that we find very important in other parts of the world. For example, for countries like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, their relations with their big neighbor, India, counts when they proactively deal with China, right? If it's Serbia's relations with the EU or Russia could count very importantly in dealing with China. So that's the regional international relations context. But also there's the global one, you know, the US-China competition that could impact Zambia's relations with China, for example. Zambia's relations with the World Bank, the IMF, could count when Zambia deals with China bilaterally. So these are the two areas on international relations. And we have added the point about peace and security, not only because our institute is the Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development, but we think the security ties between China and these smaller nations through, for example, arms sales or training of military personnel, they could count very much in the smaller countries' decision about how to deal with the rising China. So these are the five. And you see in the case on the left-hand side, this is a country in which domestic politics counts large. Therefore, the circle is drawn in a big way. but international relations tend to have a smaller impact. So in this country, these IR areas are drawn in small circles. And you notice the arrows that connect these 5 areas. These indicate the strength of the interaction that takes place between these areas. So, peace and security issues have a lot of influence on domestic politics, same as economics. Economic factors have a lot of impact on domestic politics. So they are signified by the size of the arrows. If it's a big relationship, then the arrows are drawn big. Yeah, so that's country A on the left-hand side. But in country B, that is another example on the right-hand side, the IR global issues have a bigger role to play in the relationship with this country B, with China. Peace and security, not very much, but economy, quite an important area in defining their relations with China. But you see the size of the arrows are different from the size of the arrows on the left side, country A, because the degree of the interaction that happens between these areas are different in case B. So that's the basic idea of our framework. And by applying this framework to the countries that we looked into this time, we thought we could come up with a good comparison. And through this framework, one thing we can achieve is to understand that country better. When we look into how they deal with China, we are actually exploring the political economy and security issues of that specific country. We can understand the country better. And not only that, we can make comparisons with other countries and understand the countries better and understand what are the factors that are defining their relations with China looked at from their point of view. Now, ideally, we would like to explore, for example, domestic political factors on the Chinese side too. But this time, we couldn't go that far. You need expertise on Chinese politics or Chinese political economy to do that. So there are some questions left behind. And we know this model is not quite perfect. How can we measure the size of the circles, the size of the arrows? There are many issues that are left. But still, I think we made a good start by presenting this model and see what the results are in the following presentations that you will hear. Last slide, please. This is the team that we have. And unfortunately, those who worked on Sri Lanka, Professor Chulani Ataneake, and researcher that did the Uzbekistan paper, Dr. Timur Dadabaye, and Dr. Godfrey Hampwaye from Zambia, they were not able to come here today, but all their papers are already uploaded, open access. It's the Journal of Contemporary East Asia Studies. So I hope you will have the chance to look up and download and read when you have the time to do so. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for coming once again. And I really look forward to a very constructive discussions today.
Thank you very much, Professor Takahara. And please turn off your camera. Yes, thank you. Now let's move on to the next session. Case study report from 4 speakers. We will first invite Professor Alvin Kamba, Assistant Professor, University of Denver, to present the case of the Philippines, please. Professor Kamba, please turn on your camera. Yes, and over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate it that you took all the way to commute to listen to this presentation. So my name is Alvin Kamba. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Denver, and I'm also a professor at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. I'm presenting a paper from Aquino to Marcos: Political Survival and Philippine Foreign Policy Towards China. Now, next slide, please. The question of this presentation is: how does the Philippines form its foreign policy towards China? Next slide, please. And the existing literature in Philippine politics or international relations can broadly be divided into sort of two different categories. You have a literature that focuses on geopolitics, people like Renato de Castro, Wu and Velasco, etc. And the geopolitical explanation typically comes from looking at macroeconomic factors, and then it goes down to domestic politics, and therefore it affects foreign policy. Conversely, you have a literature that looks at domestic politics, and then that translates into affecting geopolitics, and therefore foreign policy becomes the outcome variable in the end. Including myself, I've published in this literature. Next slide, please. The big problem with both literatures is when it comes to the first literature on international relations, it suffers from what I call a misspecification problem. In other words, many of these big factors about territorial disputes, or let's say the economic activity of the Philippines in relation to China, cannot really explain what's happening at in the Philippines internally. It does not get into what you call second-order effects. So that is, for me, a misspecification problem. Conversely, the domestic politics literature suffers from what I call an underspecification problem. I definitely agree domestic politics does matter. The question is, how do you define domestic politics? Which coalitions matter? Under what situation does the president of the Philippines have power to sort of shift the foreign policy towards China? Now, in contrast to both literatures, I contend that there are other factors that explain Philippine foreign policy. And in contrast to previous works, I focus on the leader as the unit of analysis rather than the state. Next slide, please. I'm on my 2nd-minute mark now. The argument of this presentation is that a combination and interaction of domestic politics, geopolitical considerations, and economic realities have shaped the approach of the Philippines towards China. I depart from previous works that look at the state. I examine the leaders in power, analyzing their primary motivation of political survival in relation to the circumstances of geopolitics, domestic politics, and economic realities. Furthermore, I nuance this framework by looking at what I call regime change. Regime change alters these three circumstances, leading to a new situation in which the new president reacts to these three circumstances. Motivated by political survival, I argued that this result in what I call a new foreign policy towards China. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, my apologies, looking at what I call the framework, but I basically draw from Professor Takahara's pentagonal model. For me, geopolitics is specifically nuanced as international relations at the global level. You do have economic realities looking at the economic status with the Philippines, and of course, domestic politics is the relationship of domestic elites with each other, who is in power, who is not in power. I draw largely from The Logic of Political Survival. It's a masterpiece by Bruno de Mesquita. The idea that leaders are motivated by political power, staying in power. That doesn't mean that they have positions per se, but they can be influential outside those positions. They can extend political power to their families. And to me, this is what motivates Philippine leaders, Philippine presidents, more than institutions, more than making money, more than legitimacy. It is about, in this context, it is about staying in power as the most important thing. Next slide, please. Now, this is the broad framework in which I actually modified. I'm going to talk. So motivated by political survival, the leaders in power or presidents in power face three circumstances: geopolitics, domestic politics, and economic realities. The interaction of these circumstances, I argue, would lead to a change of the China policy or staying in that policy of that particular leader. Now, there's a temporal effect here. The China effect, the changing the China policy affects, changing the China policy would affect the future leader in power. And by changing the China policy, it results in other effects that wherein the future leader in power would then have to deal with. So then this goes back to the future leader or the next president, wherein the previous president's China policies would have specific implications that the next leader in power would need to take care of. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just quickly, methods of data collection. I think since 2017, I've accumulated around 200 to 300 interviews with Philippine elites. That includes former presidents, congressmen, senators, business elites, civil society actors, etc. Through the JICA Ogata Institute, I was able to do interviews with members of the Marcos and Duterte families. Of course, I've analyzed Philippine foreign policy documents, press releases, international media, and secondary sources. Next slide, please. In my last 4.5 minutes, I'm just going to talk about this quickly. Of course, empirically, there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to discuss. More than happy to answer any of these in the Q&A. But when we look at President Benigno Aquino, who passed away in 2021, he, of course, got in power or took power in 2010. And there were three circumstances that affected him. Primarily, you have the geopolitical consideration of the South China Sea disputes, the Scarborough Shoal issue. You have the U.S. Trans-Pacific Partnership, and you have the relative encouragement of neighbors to sort of take on China in the South China Sea. Domestic politics, Aquino was driven by anti-Arroyo politics. President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was the president before Aquino, and she was very much aligned with China in terms of getting development finance and direct investments. And then Aquino himself criminalized people who were close to Arroyo. That led to the relative unpopularity of China in the Philippines. Aquino also faced with a relatively strong Philippine economy that could actually survive with very little Chinese help. They were very much connected to the West. Now, given these three factors, Aquino eventually ended up with a foreign policy of antagonism and distrust towards China. And that created problems eventually. Next slide, please. Duterte comes in next. So when Duterte came in, motivated by political survival, Duterte drew his legitimacy from in terms of domestic politics. He proceeded with an anti-drug crusade. This is very popular. This is well known. Something that is not well known is that Duterte was linked to Chinese criminal organizations, and these Chinese criminal organizations were using the Philippines as a base to offshore their operations. Because of that, Duterte needed to make China dependent on him by giving up the South China Sea. In exchange, China then let Duterte and let the online gambling operations continue. Geopolitics, you have a lack of support towards Hague PCA. Donald Trump won the U.S. presidency. Isolationism by the U.S. and Duterte's anti-war crusade as well. And of course, economic realities. When it comes to Philippine economy in 2016, they were not really doing that well. There were a lot of problems created from Aquino's presidency. You have public-private partnership, infrastructure construction was very slow. And you also had regional elites in the Philippines. They wanted the Duterte to capitalize on PRC-related economic opportunities. That includes development finance projects, etc. As a result, in my final minute, Duterte then had a relatively China-friendly relationship, and it turned a blind eye towards China. Next slide, please. This is the final empirical slide, but the basic argument here is that Marcos therefore changed Duterte's foreign policy. Geopolitically, China's relentless aggression in the South China Sea resulted in marginalizing the Philippines. You had greater Western concerns about China. Domestic politics, which is the most important factor in the Philippines, Marcos is concerned about weakening the Duterte faction. When it comes to 2028, there's going to be another elections. How do you weaken them? Then you sever the links between the Dutertes and China. You weaken the links together. When it comes to economic realities, the Philippines was suffering from a post-COVID economy that was relatively weak. However, they're tilting back towards the United States to come up with opportunities. In the end, what's happening right now is antagonism and distrust towards China. Next slide, please. And concluding this paper, given these three empirical cases, I've illustrated that a combination and interaction of domestic politics, geopolitical considerations, and economic realities have shaped the Philippines' approach towards China. I focus on what I call political survival in how leaders deal with these three factors, and how this eventually creates a feedback loop that affects future leaders in power. I suggest future research should apply Professor Takahara's concept and political survival to other leaders, and perhaps that can strengthen the paper's external validity. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kamba, for your very comprehensive presentation. And please turn off your camera. Our next speaker is Professor Chen Chui Kwik, professor at National University of Malaysia, to present the case of Lao PDR. Professor Kwik, please turn on your camera, and then over to you.
Thanks very much, Madam Chairperson, for your kind introduction. Very good afternoon to everyone. Let me begin by thanking JICA, particularly Professor Akio Takahara, for including me in this multi-year project, and also for having me joining this group of distinguished panelists. So I'm a Malaysian, as you can tell from my rather strong Malaysian accent. I'm a Malaysian, but JICA tasked me to focus on the case of Laos. And you might wonder why I focus on Laos out of so many countries, even in the region. So I think we can come up with many reasons, but I think two in particular are very important. So two important reasons to focus on Laos. It is the larger context on the agency. Number one, it's for policy reason, for empirical reason, and secondly, for academic conceptual reason. For policy reason, we know that the Lao-China Railway project is the first China financed, China constructed railway project in Southeast Asia, the first to be completed well before the Jakarta-Bandung project, as Thailand and Malaysia and others are also involving in the China-funded railway project. So that is for policy reason. The second reason very much a focus on the concept of agency or host country agency, something that Takahara-san Sensei mentioned early on during his introductory remarks. So here, with that two big reasons, I thought what I'm going to do is to structure my points into three sections. Number one is about definition. I'm going to come up with a definition that hopefully we can use to conceive, to measure, and hopefully to compare different kind of agency in infrastructure connectivity cooperation. And secondly, I will contextualize why Lao-China infrastructure project is relevant, is important for both policy and academic reason. And finally, in the remaining time of focus, I will highlight just a number of key findings that could help us to understand better about the various factors driving and also limiting host country agency. So first thing first, next slide, please. First thing first about agency. This concept, of course, is kind of important for many reasons. And before we go to defining agency in the context of infrastructure cooperation, let us try to have a generic definition on agency in general in the context of international relations. Some observers suggest quite a straightforward kind of definition. Big country, big agency. Small country, small agency, or perhaps a little or no agency. That clearly it's a misconception because as we can tell from all these various cases, even a small country or weaker country can still have some level of agency, perhaps in different way. And how best to conceive that? So here, this agency, this definition that we are sharing here, it's for generic reason. So we would define an agency as an inclination, is a tendency, inclination and insistence to make our own decision rather than being pushed around by bigger actor and also a stronger power. But in the context of interstate kind of cooperation, we can also pay attention to a number of dimensions, whether or not when smaller country, smaller actor try to exercise their agency, can they actually have the ability to explore options? So the more options, the better, the higher the agency. Can smaller country also make efforts either on their own or drawing in some external assistance to cultivate space? So more space, more negotiation power, and eventually kind of a country that has high agency should be the one that are able to not just exploring options, cultivating a space, but also optimizing the desired, the prioritized goals, which bring me to the definition of an agency in the infrastructure connectivity corporation. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a kind of a, I thought, straightforward the definition that we can use in order to measure, to conceive a host country agency across the board, mainly those that are backed by foreign countries when it comes to financing, also building, implementing, and all that. So there are 3 stages that I thought are important for us to have in mind and also conduct as research. So 3 stages of all these infrastructure cooperation. Number 1, it's about the initiation. Who actually initiate the projects? And secondly, is about the negotiation process. Who actually have a bigger say in pushing the envelope in a bargaining? And finally, the implementation. And implementation stage, of course, should also include the renegotiation. This is clear for a number of cases where host country actually has tried to renegotiate during the early stage of implementation. Yeah. So with that, let me very quickly move on to the next slide in order to contextualize the Lao-China Rail project. So the best way to contextualize Lao-China Rail project, the most important, the backbone project for Lao-China Infrastructure Corporation, there are 3 big points that we need to highlight in order to better understand why should we bother about Lao-China Rail project. So number 1 is about beyond this project, despite the fact that it's about Lao-China Rail project, is beyond Laos and beyond China. It's actually involving other countries, particularly Thailand. Thailand through NEDA, and NEDA is actually the Thai version of JICA. Thailand has been involved quite importantly in a number of stages, especially the implementation stage of Lao-China Rail project. So Lao-China Rail project is more than just Laos and more than just China. Other countries, Thailand in particular, is also related. And secondly, although this is a rail project, we know that the importance, it's beyond railroad. It is also connected to other types of infrastructure projects in Laos, but also in other countries, especially the neighboring countries of Thailand, and some would relate that southwards to Malaysia and also Singapore. That brings me to the third aspect of beyond bilateral cooperation. So there is a regional significance of the Lao-China Rail project. Regional significance in the sense that since Laos is a country, the landlocked country that is connected to China directly. So now that the Lao-China Rail project is up and coming, up and running, we know that there is a Southeast Asian railway connected directly to PRC. PRC's own vast network of high-speed rail. But it is not just going upwards, northwards, but it's also going to be connected southwards to other parts of Southeast Asia. And we do know that, as we mentioned about early on, Thailand is very much kind of connected and also involved. And during the field work that JICA kind of kindly arranged, we got an opportunity to actually spend time not just in different parts of Laos, but in the Lao-Thailand border, we know that Nong Khai is a very much kind of already having up and coming rail connectivity corporation. And so we are going to see a larger picture. The larger picture that Lao-China Rail project has a regional implication in the sense that it would not stop at the Lao border. It's going southwards to Thailand and also other parts of Southeast Asia. And with that, perhaps we can have the next slide that show the map. That this is a very much, of course, the wider and also a longer vision that some call it as a Pan-Asia Railway, or some would call it as the Singapore-Kunming Railway that Malaysia very much promoted back in the mid-1990s. But at the moment, as we follow the news about Lao-China Rail project and related projects, we know that China is pushing the high-speed rail version of the Singapore-Kunming Railway. And Lao project is important because of this is the first part of the central route, and then it is supposed to go southwards all the way to Malaysia and also Singapore. So, and let's move on to the next slide. And here, the map shows very much about the different, not just the Lao-China railway project, the different major stops, but it also indicates the other type of non-rail projects that are very much China-related or Belt and Road related. So we won't have time to go into that, but we welcome everyone to take a look at the article that was published in the Waseda journal. So next slide will be the final slide. And with that slide, I try to summarize the key points, the key findings of the project. So it's among the findings, it points to a number of important dimensions. Number one is a case about the Lao Belt and Road engagement. So there is a gap between the elite perception and also the public perception. Elite, of course, are very sanguine and so very positive, upbeat, highlighting a number of benefits. The benefits can be summarized into 3 T, about tourism, about trade, and also about the transportation. Yeah, and this is something that wherever we go in Laos, the Lao elite from the government and also others will highlight the kind of benefits that they're getting. Public-wise, it's a more mixed in the sense that they do acknowledge the kind of a benefit in terms of traveling, commuting from one point to the other, and that helps certainly those, especially in the northern part, where public transportation is such an issue. But there are also those that highlight a number of economic implications, and some would highlight about the physical and also the debt issue that Laos, as a smaller country, as a weaker government, will have to deal with for a long time. The second aspect of the key findings will be about the host country agency, and it is a mix. It is a mix, so it's not like a completely positive and negative in the sense that Laos does show the kind of a host country agency, especially at the initiation aspect. They are the one who push the envelope, who pros the project. So the infrastructure cooperation in Laos and in many countries is not completely about big power push, China push. More often than not, it is also about small state pull. In this case, Laos is the one who demonstrated the high-level agency by proposing this project. It is also trying to assert agency during the negotiation and during the implementation, since this is a project that based in Laos. But other than that, the fieldwork also indicates that Laos is quite fragile when it comes to the actual implementation and also during the hard part of negotiation. And this is certainly something that was elaborated in the paper. So what explained? And the final point is that what explained this kind of a mixed host country agency. So we can look into driver, but also determination. So driver is the main motive that push the elite, Lao elite, to make the political decision. It took them some time, a few years, to go ahead with this very controversial project. But there are also a number of determinants that shape and also determine the extent and also the pace in which the infrastructure cooperation have gone into some limit, and also explain why the host country agency seems to be quite limited, especially in the negotiation and implementation. So to cut the long story short, the determinants can be grouped into 3. One is political system. Laos is a one-party system, very lack of the bottom-up societal check and balance. So that actually weakened and also limited the host country agency. But there are other internal inadequacies. Internal inadequacies in terms of lack of resources, lack of institution which can assert some institutional check and balance. So finally, external factor is also important, and this is where I think countries like Japan, for example, should and could play a big part in providing the kind of external alternative, so that countries like Laos does not have to put all eggs in one single basket. With that, I will stop my presentation. Thank you very much.
Professor Quick, thank you very much for your very clear analysis and presentation. Well, our next speaker is Professor Laifa Yasmin, professor at the University of Dhaka, to present the case of Bangladesh. Please.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, here for inviting us, and also to JICA RI for initiating a project to understand China's engagement in different countries, especially those with lesser agency, and why they are interacting with China or why China is interested about them. I thank sincerely Professor Takahara and Shiga Sansei, and of course, behind the scene, always Ray-san and Imai-san, they have been our constant beacon and guiding us towards, with the deadline and helping us to keep the track. So what I'm doing here is to talk about Bangladesh-China relations and Bangladesh's geopolitical agency, as well as China's regional and global ambitions. So here in this paper, while we have a structural method of understanding relationship between China and other smaller countries, in particularly in Bangladesh's case, I analyzed it from two different perspectives. That is Bangladesh's rising geopolitical agency, why, as well as why China is interested to engage with the rest of the world. China's opening up or go west or open up, all these policies started much later. And after that, especially in Bangladesh's case from 2006, China, slide please, Race. Yeah, so you have seen that there has been a qualitative shift in Bangladesh-China relations, especially from 2006. And on one hand, China started its opening up policy. On the other hand, in South Asia, for the first time, China emerged as Bangladesh's largest trading partner altogether, surpassing India. And this turned out to be a big event for Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is often, as you can see in the fourth point, that Bangladesh's locational reality is very interesting. It is surrounded by two big neighbors, India on one side, and Bangladesh-India shares the fifth largest land boundary in the world, and on the other hand, a small strip of joining with Myanmar. So for Bangladesh, often, the trading with India became the priority because of the open land border and other, sort of precondition geopolitical and geographical, necessities. So here we can see that from 2006, when China, overpassed India, that became, and that provided us to rethink and to understand what are the patterns of relationship between Bangladesh and China. There are increasing scrutiny on Bangladesh-China relations. And we suddenly in Bangladesh, we found out that very few have thought about this, very few have studied Bangladesh-China relations, except for a number of, periodicals, number of, small articles. But there has not been a structural gaze, understanding, exploration of, patterns and nuances of Bangladesh-China relations. Why this is important? Bangladesh's rising geopolitical agency, that Bangladesh is the 8th largest in the world in terms of population. That is a big thing now. As we can see, a number of countries are facing demographic crisis, as we call it, or we can also term it, one of the famous outline of a title of a book is Graying of the Great Powers. On the other hand, in Bangladesh, we enjoy a demographic dividend. A number of young people is relatively higher than many other countries. Therefore, Bangladesh has a real potential to offer for the rest of the world. And then Bangladesh is also the second largest economy in South Asia. And from 2020 October onward, Bangladesh has the highest per capita GDP income. So these are some of the factors often we do not associate with Bangladesh. When we think about Bangladesh, we think about Bangladesh as a disaster-prone country. We think about Bangladesh facing flood or cyclone, or political instability. But we do not look at why Bangladesh has been able to maintain a steady growth, which has not been seen or which has not been outlined or marked by other countries of the world. So after Bangladesh's, resolving of maritime delimitation boundary issue with its two big neighbors, India and Myanmar, we have seen the locational reality of Bangladesh change. In Bangladesh's, internal domestic sort of writing, our foreign policy experts used to write that Bangladesh is a victim of geography because Bangladesh did not have unfettered access to the Bay of Bengal. But as the moment this was resolved, the moment Bangladesh has a bigger, territory, or as we call it, liquid territory in the Bay of Bengal, we have seen that Bangladesh can be seen as the gateway to South Asia because Bangladesh can provide easy access for Nepal and Bhutan, the landlocked countries of South Asia. Bangladesh can provide access to only. Bangladesh can provide access to, the landlocked Northeast India. So we can see Bangladesh is often, as the current Chinese ambassador in Bangladesh says, the pearl of the Bay of Bengal. So that's how Bangladesh's rising geopolitical agency, where writers in Bangladesh, when it comes to regional geopolitics, takes three lenses. Either Bangladesh is balancing, or Bangladesh is hedging, or the third, stream, which where I like to, give my 2 cents of thought, is that rise of an assertive Bangladesh, that Bangladesh is able to exert its sort of geopolitical agency with vis-a-vis both India and China. So in this particular paper, I pointed out Bangladesh-China relations from three perspectives. It's global, it's infrastructure politics with China, and domestic political considerations in Bangladesh, the fallout of regional politics, that is India-China tussle in the region, and how Bangladesh is faring. And last but not the least, the global instabilities and how Bangladesh is enjoying the global instability, or often it is called as plurilateral world, where countries are more interested to have short-term relationship, and how Bangladesh is reaping the benefit of that. Next slide, please. So here we can see that the pentagonal model provided by JICA is extremely significant for analyzing, this particular relationship, that Bangladesh-China relationship, because it provides us a lens to understand structurally that if domestic politics plays an important role, if economy has an important role, or peace and security, global international relations, or regional international relations. And here we can see in the case of, the next slide, please. In the case of Bangladesh, we can see that domestic politics, economy, and regional geopolitics, these three items play extremely significant relationship when sort of identifying Bangladesh-China bilateral relations. Both countries have their interest in pursuing a strong bilateral relationship. Why? Because in my paper, I used a theoretical sort of analysis as well as an analytical sort of understanding that why China engages with the rest of the world. So there are three particular issues from China's perspective, that it has a sort of history of being humiliated by the West. So in its internal politics, in its domestic politics, the idea of never again reverberates. It is a prerogative so that China is never, China loses its sovereignty the way it lost before. Therefore, it becomes the driving force of China's engagement with the rest of the world. Bangladesh is no exception to that. So we can see that how, in China's global economic footprint is also a part of its strategic idea, strategic relationship, its strategic sort of motivation, so that China cannot be bypassed in making global arrangements, in making global charter for the rest of the world. So that actually, from China's perspective, is a significant motivation for keeping stronger bilateral relations in different parts of the world. Also, here I argued from Bangladesh's point of view that for Bangladesh, the economic considerations that Bangladesh was unable to draw attention, especially for infrastructure development, where World Bank or IMF or other Western financial institutions were not inclined to provide enough money for Bangladesh to develop, elevate its current infrastructure. Whereas China has been very generous in providing this money. And therefore, we can see that China's interest mutually converged. And that is how we can see China's stronger presence. Since I have only 1 minute, I'll just point out the nuances of China-Bangladesh relations from both countries' perspective. So one other point that often gone missing in analysis of Bangladesh-China relationship is that what is the pattern of China's engagement in Bangladesh vis-a-vis other countries, for example, European countries, for example, America, for example, India. Why China is more welcome in Bangladesh than any other trading partner? So in my paper, very briefly, I identified a number of elements. For example, China has a larger domestic market than any single European European country and China can provide a competitive pricing, these other European countries can seldom come up with. And therefore, Bangladeshi buyers are interested to purchase from China more. Then again, the cultural and religious reason, which often which often can be a issue for doing business with India, which is not so much an issue with China. And another issue that I pointed to our European friends, that whenever you call with a buyer or with someone in China, they're always up as if they do not sleep. But in European or Western culture, there is something called weekend. There is something called leave. There is something called, going on vacation, summer vacation, or Christmas holidays. Except for Chinese New Year, we have not seen any instances, any time when we are not being able to connect with someone living in China. So that has provided a big incentive for Bangladeshi businessmen to do more business with China. The last slide, please. So what I pointed out that there are a number of other areas that have remained overlooked in our understanding or analysis of China's engagement, not only with Bangladesh, but with other countries as well. For example, the role of soft power. The way the Chinese speak Bengali, often we don't, even we being native Bengali speaker, we do not speak that Bangla that well, Bengali that well. And this is something I have heard from our other South Asian friends, that Chinese speak better Sinhalese than the Sinhala people themselves. Why? Because in our everyday deliberations, we increasingly incorporate more English words than Bengali word. So whenever I am asked to give an interview in a Chinese media in Bangla, they have to remind me to speak in Bangla, because I, unintentionally, I'm speaking in English. So this is very interesting that they learn Bangla, and whichever country they go to do proper business in that country. Also, I already talked about patterns of doing business, and easing of visa is another issue that we have seen does not work with European Union, getting a Schengen visa or American visa. The idea is that all Bangladeshis are trying to run away. But the Bangladeshis who are trying to run away, they don't seek for visa. They seek for other methods. This is often not understood. So easing of visa is another step that China took that we have problem with many other countries of the world. And here we can see that India factor is omnipresent in developing a solid Bangladesh-China relationship. So here we can see that in the kind of India factor that work in regional geopolitics, where we know that with Japan, Bangladesh, Japan, India, we have a very interesting infrastructure development program, or in other words, that more and more voices are coming up, rising in South Asia, talking about dominance of India, and therefore often countries want a third security guarantor, third security partner. And as Japan has come forward, some other countries, for example, South Korea is having a talk with Bangladesh and India to have a 3-country infrastructure plan. So as countries come forward, that can actually create a different kind of future for countries like Bangladesh and other countries in South Asia. As a teacher, I tend not to hold on to time limits, so I apologize for taking more time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yasmin, for your presentation as well as thank you very much for cooperation in timekeeping. And then our last speaker in this session is Professor Dragana Mitrovic, professor at University of Belgrade, to present the case of Serbia. Professor Mitrovic, please turn on your camera, and then over to you.
First, I would like to express my happiness to be here today with you, and I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Takahara for inviting me to be part of this project, and also my deep gratitude to Professors Shiga and Kitano and the whole JICA Sadako Ogata Research Institute team for heartfully and professionally supporting us through the whole process. Now we are just presenting the results of our research and the outcomes. As you can see, I'm talking about China-Serbia relations, and what I wanted to point out, start from, is actually the Chinese initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, that put a special focus towards Serbia. But just 1 year before this initiative was launched in 2012, China launched another initiative, and that is at that time 16+1, and then was expanded to 17+1 when Greece joined. And but at the moment, these 3 Baltic republics withdraw, and Czech Republic is sort of announcing withdrawal. But nevertheless, this is very important for our story. And here is Republic of Serbia, and the yellow marked countries are those among the original 16 that were not and still are not EU member states, while the rest of these 16 countries, or 17 or 14, actually are EU member states. And that difference is huge difference because of the EU legislation that cut off EU member states from certain way of cooperating with China, which means cooperation based on Chinese loans that recipient countries should give sovereign guarantees for. EU legislation strictly forbids such loans, and that leaves only Southeastern European non-EU member states eligible for such Chinese investments. Serbia centrally located, as we see China's proposed Land Sea Express route from the Piraeus port of the Greece over Macedonia, now northern Macedonia, then Serbia, then Hungary, Budapest. We see centrality of Serbia. And traditionally, through centuries, Serbia had that sort of central place. So, and Serbia is not, being not a NATO member country and being military neutral makes Serbia even more attractive, let's say, or trusty partner of China than other countries. So, and that is from Chinese side. And of course, China wanted to expand its economic and political and cultural influence over this part of the Europe, but also in geopolitical sense, you see this the formation of these states just cuts Europe from the North Baltic Sea towards the southern seas, and no wonder it was accepted or seen by European Union as a huge challenge. Well, going back to Serbia-China cooperation, we can say that all these drivers that we put as a basic methodological approach to analyze drivers that actually move the recipient countries or smaller countries to go deeper into cooperation with China, finding something positive and valuable in that cooperation, and being recipient countries in many ways. We can start from the first one, like peace and security, because when we come to Serbia, it is, well, even in this map that for me is not correct, we see that it's about China being permanent member of UN Security Council. And being a permanent member of Security Council, China proved to be a country that supports Serbia's sovereignty when it comes to self-declared independence on Kosovo. And China, as well as Russia, is guardian of the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 that actually says that Kosovo is a Serbian southern province under the protectorate of the United Nations. And so that is of the crucial importance to Serbia. Within that peace and security cooperation, we've seen military cooperation between China and Serbia. Sorry, my slides are not packed the way we would expect. And this is something that was arose a lot of attention because this is Chinese missile, anti-cruise missile something system, actually sort of a version of the Russian C-300 that was transferred to Serbia through spectacular flights of a Chinese military 6 planes over Eurasia, including some NATO member state countries, and then delivered to Serbia. Anyway, you can read the details in the contemporary in the Journal of Contemporary East Asia Studies, as our papers were published there, and it's open access, and also the JICA web page. And also that cooperation includes Interior Ministry's cooperation, selling some equipment to Serbian Interior Ministry, and etc. Of course, economic driver is one of, as with all these countries, one of the most important, because according to some estimations, China started and continued to load investments, mostly indirect through loans. And American Enterprise Institute measured these investments from in this period that you can see, like 17.3 billion US dollars, of that 4.4 billion direct investments, and over 12 billion Chinese loans. I think they exaggerated a bit, but it's more or less correct. These are the biggest direct investments. I listed a few of them. You can read about all the projects and all the investments in detail in my research. But beyond that, China extended these loans over $12 billion to Serbia for these purposes, like upgraded and building one more thermal power station, Kostolac, you see the price, then highways, roads, bridges, railways, the sewage system in Belgrade heating pipeline, etc. Then you see total inflow of Chinese, and these are direct investments in Serbia last year. These are from China, the first biggest pile, then Dutch and Romania, UK, Germany, etc. Mostly European countries. So Chinese direct investments over years, you see 2016 still was sort of modest, and this is all together like cumulative. And okay, so almost all the time gone. So China became the second investor next to the European Union. And Chinese corporations these are like the main trade partners of Serbia. So Germany and then China, the second one, and China became, Chinese three corporations became Zijin Mining, Zijin Copper, Herbis Group, the three major exporters from Serbia. This is one of the examples, Zijin Mining. Anyway, this is cultural influence. The other factors like regional and global international relations, it's very important because such good economic and political relations and trust between Serbia and China are sort of huge leverage on the Serbian side when it goes with negotiating with European Union, that Serbia waits like 13 years to become a member state, and the conditions are changing all the time. And then we see some countries becoming overnight candidates. And also when Washington is pressing Serbia and scrutinizing cooperation with China, there is sort of Chinese leverage in relations with other major regional or global powers on the Serbian side. Also, domestic driver was that Serbian political leaders could say that through friendly cooperation with China, they delivered some public goods like good transportation, connectivity within country, upgraded GDP, living standards, etc., through cooperation with China. And also in general public view regarding China is extremely positive. So it's also driving that agenda on a domestic political level. So I will wrap up saying that all these drivers prove to be, as you could see, extremely strong. I put like all these four: international relations, global international relations, regional peace and security, economy, like the strongest, domestic politics still high, strong, like a four. So there were very strong drivers on the Serbian side to engage with the strong relations, total relations defined as a strategic cooperation between two countries. And it was announced that even this year, Chinese president will again, after 2016, visit Serbia. And Serbian president visited all 3 times, went to this Belt and Road Initiative summit in Beijing. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Mitrovic. It was very insightful presentation. Thank you. And next, let's move on to the plenary discussion and the Q&A session. Let us first change the seating. The moderator and the discussant, please come up to the stage and then take a seat, please. And then now let me introduce our moderator and the discussant to join the 4 presenters from the previous session. To all the speakers on the stage, when I call your name and introduce you to the floor, please turn on your camera one by one. And before going to the session, the questionnaire on this hall, in this hall is going to be collected. So could you please finish your writing questionnaire, filling up the questionnaire, please. And our staff member is going to collect all the questionnaires now. No? Yes? First, let me introduce the moderator, Professor Naohiro Kitano, visiting lecturer of the JICA Ogata Research Institute and professor at Waseda University. Next, as a discussant, we have Professor Hiroaki Shiga, visiting lecturer of the JICA Ogata Research Institute and professor at Yokohama National University. Professor Kitano and Professor Shiga, please turn on your camera so that people can see your face.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Nao Kitano. I'm a professor of Waseda University. Thank you, Arvin, Chenchui, Ralpha, and Durgana for your excellent presentations. We really enjoyed. And firstly, I would like to invite Shiga-san as a discussant.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Kitano. And I would also like to thank all 4 professors, Professor Kamba, Professor Yasmin, Professor Mitrovic, and Professor Quick. So I'm very happy to share my humble observation upon hearing the 4 presentations. So it seems to me that there is a growing recognition that we stand at the turning point of history. So one of such indication is that German Chancellor, Prime Minister Olaf Scholz recently said that we are living at the Zeitenwende. Zeitenwende is a German term that describes a turning point of history. And he went on to argue that the future world will no longer just same as the world of the past. So against this background, it seems to me that the influence of so-called realists appears to be increasing. So they emphasize the importance of the traditional security issues, and they believe that only the great powers, only the big powers are the meaningful actors that shapes the international politics. So some of them even go further to argue that the future world would return to an era like the 19th century Europe, the so-called the concert of Europe, when the British Empire, Russian Empire, and Austro-Hungarian Empire dominated the international politics. And also they argue that small powers, small countries has no option but to accept the international order devised by the big powers. Okay, but here the question arises, is this really a realistic assessment, realistic perception of the world? And if it is not realistic, so we have to ask, how are small countries trying to exercise agency in the world politics? And so, of course, we have to ask what kind of relations are established between big powers and small countries. And I think that relations are much more nuanced than the self-proclaimed realists assume. And Professor Quick's presentation illustrates this point most symbolically. And we tend to be obsessed by the idea that China is trying to entrap small countries by doing a debt trap. But according to Professor Quick, he made an observation about the relationship between Lao Republic and China, and he observed that it was Laos, not China. It was Lao Republic that actively initiated the cooperation with China in the construction project of the high-speed railways. And also, Professor Quick observed some limited nature of the agency of the Republic, but his findings eloquently illustrate the danger of the bias when we observe Chinese behavior. And also, Professor Yasmin explained how Bangladesh, in a rapidly changing international context, implementing a very autonomous diplomacy, which is called all-round, all-directional diplomacy, in order to achieve socio-economic development of the country. And she argued that Bangladesh is leveraging its geopolitical positioning to become a very important regional player. So it seems to me that this is a warning, warning to the West, including Japan, and also to China, which are trying to strategically utilize development cooperation and ODA in order to attract small countries in their camps. And Professor Kamba persuasively explained how the relations of the Philippines and China are inextricably intertwined to domestic economic and political reality. And Japan now regards the Philippines as a like-minded country, and Philippines as a like-minded country, and is trying to deepen security cooperation by providing not only the ODA, but recently devised new scheme of official security assistance. However, it seems to me that it is very difficult to predict how long the Philippines would remain a like-minded country of Japan, given the possibility that the Philippines may opt for friendly relations with China in light of its own domestic political and economic realities. So in that sense, Dr. Kamba's presentation is a very instructive for Japanese foreign policies and ODA policies. And lastly, Professor Mitrovich's discussion reminded us of how the relations between China and Serbia is composed of so diverse elements, including so many actors. And in particular, it was quite impressive for me, and it is important to note that China's consistent support as a guardian of Serbia's territorial integrity over the issue of Kosovo defines the relationship between these two countries. So it seems to me that it is a warning to Western countries who always think that their diplomatic behavior is normatively justified. So in sum, all four presentations show that small countries do exercise agency and that their relations with China are quite diverse and composed of various factors and elements. So they all show how the great power-centered view of the international order, such as the assertion that the current great power rivalry is a battle between the democracies and authoritarianism. And that does not necessarily resonate in small countries. And fortunately, big countries, including Japan and the United States, are beginning to realize the rise of global South or the rise of the West. And the tendency for small countries to exert agency over big powers would intensify, I guess. And in light of this, recently, Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio said in the address in the United Nations General Assembly that he said, even if we walk on the path which we believe to be right, if the global South turned their back, we would find ourselves in the minority and unable to resolve mounting international politics. So I believe that this research project consists of all these scholars contributed to such an nuanced understanding of the realistic perception of the international situation. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shiga-san, for your very comprehensive comments on four speakers. And before starting the discussion, I would like to show just in the very short period of time, the outcome, one of the outcome of this research project, my research with Miyabayashi-san on China's foreign aid estimate. Next, please. This figure shows the China's foreign aid as a proxy of official development assistance, ODA, as a proxy defined by the OECD DAC, Development Assistance Committee, and on a grant equivalent basis, and not considering the grant vaccine contribution, which was estimated, colored shallow orange. The China's foreign aid is not increasing significantly, rather it's decreased since 2019. Now, China's aid agency, SIDCA, has been mobilizing other sources of fund because in the near future, the foreign aid budget wouldn't increase significantly from China Exim Bank, China Development Bank, and AIIB. So I think for researchers, it is important to continue to comprehensively examine how China is going to, improve its foreign aid. And next, I would like to show the radar chart. Next, please. Okay, this slide shows the radar chart which each presenter showed in their presentations, Philippines, Laos, Bangladesh, and Serbia. So consist of five factors. So domestic politics, economy, peace and security, international relations in regional level, and global international relations. And as you can see, there are big difference among four countries. And it seems that domestic politics is highly graded, and also economy, while the peace and security or regional international relationship or global, there is a very big differences. So now I would like to ask four presenters to respond others' presentations as well as Shiga-san's comment and this radar chart. So I would like to first ask Alvin, and each have 3 minutes, okay? Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Kitano and Professor Shiga, for this opportunity to talk more. Yeah, I don't have a lot to say about the radial chart, except that domestic politics is a major consideration. It's probably the biggest consideration in looking at Philippine foreign policy. A lot of previous works, in my view, they treat foreign policy as an independent variable. They sort of start from it without explaining how foreign policy is made. And to me, that is the reason why domestic politics should come in as sort of the primary explanatory factor in sort of explaining Philippine foreign policy, right? Part of it is also institutional. The Philippines is a relatively weak democracy, but it also has a long tradition for elite politics, ranging back from American colonialism. It's long been a democracy, probably one of the longest in Asia. And in 1986, when President Ferdinand Marcos was deposed from power, the Philippine government instituted a constitutional reform of only 1-term limit or 1 term per president. So because of this confluence of factors, I sort of see Philippine politicians and business elites trying to influence who gets power, who doesn't get power, and how that influences and shapes both geopolitics and the economic the economic factors in the Philippines. In contrast, I definitely do not see regional politics mattering as much, defined as ASEAN. Part of it is because ASEAN does not have an enforcement body. It relies a lot on consensus. ASEAN also has a problem in terms of the Philippines has actually tried to forward South China Sea issues in ASEAN during the Aquino administration. Definitely did not work. Cambodia blocked a lot of Philippine attempts. That definitely led to stifling any sort of regional attempt. And when it comes to peace and security, I also don't see it in the Philippines at all. I mean, you do have rebellion issues, insurgency in Mindanao, etc. But that is not something that I sort of found in the Philippine context. Now, I would love to hear about what others have found in the radial charts, and from there I pass it on back to Professor Kitano.
Oh, thank you very much, Alvin. And it seems that the Philippines, very different from other countries, as you have explained. So now I would like to Chen Chui-san for your response.
Thanks very much, Professor Kitano. My quick response, hopefully within the 3 minutes that we have given us, is that domestic politics certainly is I would say, the most important factor. This is kind of an echo and also confirm other cases as well. And this is where legitimation comes in. During my presentation, I was not able to really elaborate that part. But here, I think this is a perfect, I would say, time for us to look into how legitimation is the core of the domestic politics that have driven not just Laos, but many other countries in Southeast Asia and beyond to consider the kind of foreign-backed developmental projects seriously, because one thing is very important, and that relates to the other 4 factors that are within this model, is that because of legitimation and particularly development-based performance legitimation, and this is the reason why for many countries like Laos and also other countries, infrastructure is not just an economic issue. It is actually a political issue. Political issue in the sense that infrastructure and key infrastructure is the one big factor that are tangible and remind that the ruling elites, governments, regardless of the political system, they can use to tell the audience, the people, whichever the system, that the government it's performing in a way that benefit the audiences, right? They have the key targeted groups. And this is where they are trying to evaluate the opportunities offered by outsiders, either China or other actors, neighboring countries or regional grouping. To what extent, what others, China or other countries are offering us can help us to perform these developmental-based results. And this is where I guess let us mention link not just domestic politics and economics, but also a link the IR regional global aspect and fundamentally peace and security. Very important point for countries like Laos who suffered conflicts and also armed kind of violence for decades. And this is where it's one of the rare peaceful time when Lao government can make sure that they can turn infrastructure, especially rural, from a landlocked to a landing country. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chen Chui-san. And next, I would like to ask Lailufa for your feedback.
Thank you, Professor. As you know, I can see from, Professor Akio, sorry, Shiga-san's comment. Yes, it's very interesting that you pointed out something that I really want to develop later on, that the manner of engagement, where China is sort of increasing its presence, is not only because of Chinese money, but how the money is strategically sort of made seem lucrative for the recipient country, and where other countries are not able to offer this money. There is a big difference in pursuing this politics of economy, politics of infrastructure, and there's a stark difference between how the West is doing it and how China is doing it. It is, you know, an area that has remained underexplored or even unexplored at times, as well as how this particular, you know, political economy is tied with culture. Political economy is tied with soft power. These are some of the areas where China talks about accommodation, Western countries talks about singularity. We are speaking in English right now, right? So everyone has to learn in English, and that's how you have to communicate. So to sort of cross the barrier, the Chinese are learning local languages, which we do not see very much, you know, being done by other Western countries, learning the local language, learning the local culture, and pay respect to that local culture. That is where China is getting an upper hand, and this has remained quite underexplored in the literature, so that we can, you know, tie different factors. And that is why in my sort of radar analysis, economy is very important, and economy is tied with domestic politics, because you are creating your acceptance by giving money and learning about domestic politics. And let me remind you that China is the only country that was able to launch a, you know, Silk Road program involving the ruling party and the main opposition party back in 2019. Nobody has been able to make them sit together, the two political parties, but China has been able to do that. Although that does not work now, but there was a time that it was possible for China to do that. So this is something is very significant for us to understand. And also the Global South, you can see increasingly, because of a number of issues, that we can see that China's acceptance is increasing. So I took Bangladesh as a case study. My future plan is to sort of develop more understanding, keeping Bangladesh as a case study, about China's manner of engagement vis-a-vis a manner of engagement of other countries. And I can see one of the questions that was there, you know, what is the global infrastructure issue, and what is the global market and the quality, I think it was quality of Chinese products for global market. So when it comes to Chinese products, there is no singular global market, because it depends on the buyer on providing the specificity of a particular product. And that is why, again, in Bangladesh, China can provide, if you ask for a product to be made out of 100 taka, they will make it, or spending 200 taka, they will make it. That flexibility is also something that has made doing business with China lucrative. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Lailufa-san. And next, Durgana-san.
Thank you very much. Well, I will just continue with adding something that I didn't have a chance to mention in my previous speech, and that is like about economic cooperation. It was very useful, as we said, because it helps Serbia to upgrade its traffic infrastructure, somewhat energy infrastructure, to become better connected with the neighboring countries, because China was engaged there too. But also many of these projects, if not all, would have been done much better with much more higher environmental consideration, with maybe less corruption and more better addressing the local communities' needs, etc., with a stronger social responsibility of Chinese corporations engaged. But it wasn't the case, because somehow from a top political level, all Chinese corporations were protected, even from something that is like normal in any business environment, like go and see if they are performing what was signed, or are they respecting environmental standards, etc. Have they been responding to local communities' demands when it comes to maybe environmental damage or similar? Because of the weak institutions and sort of corruption existed, there was not a question. All these arrangements were made on a top political levels. Chinese corporations were just assigned to do the most of the work. Local corporations were subcontractors, and projects were financed by Exim Bank up to 85%, and the rest was given by from Serbian budget, and guaranteed by state guarantees, sovereign guarantees, which means either built or not, either sustainable or not, you have to pay back each penny. And it's no that trap or something that malign China influence narrative, none of these, but China just wants its money to be paid back, no matter of the considerations of the sustainability and all other social, economic, etc. should be on the side of the domestic actors. It's not like China's responsibility. And of course, what was driving domestic political actors to engage with China was the quickness. Such arrangements were so quickly approved, and just next moment you have to pay back, and next moment, the day after, Chinese corporations could come and start work. It doesn't go that way with the World Bank projects or European Union projects, etc. So in a sense, it was positive, because you could see the results quickly, but then you have all these side effects that you could have been avoided. But then it's a lecture for these World Bank and other projects that they should also move quicker if they want to meet the needs of the rising economies of developing countries, etc. So that was what I wanted to add within these time limits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dirugana-san, for your very comprehensive, comments, response. And although this project focusing on the relationship between the smaller countries and China, but there are lots of implications we can learn from this research project, as Japanese aid agency. And now I have several questions, and we would like to open the floor and to have a lively discussion. The first, I would like to invite Dr. Liu Yong-wook from Singapore.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity to ask questions. I enjoyed all the presentations. I have two general comments for which I want to invite the panelists to share their views, and one specific question.
And please,
I will try to keep it short.
Yeah.
And then one specific question to Professor Quick. So let me ask the question first. So is the Laos railway project financially sustainable? So financially sustainable, that railway project. So even within China, with the exception of the Beijing-Shanghai leg, all the high-speed railway are actually operating at a loss. So it's one thing to build these things. It's a completely another thing to sustain, right, and operate them at a profitable level. So can you comment on this, right, with respect to the Laos Railway? The two general comments are for the other presenters. So all the case studies that I've heard suffer from the problem of overdetermination, right, in the social science research method. In other words, there are more independent variables than the dependent variable, and each one of the independent variables is sufficient to explain the dependent variable. Or to put it another way, the variation on the dependent variable is too little for us to know the relative importance of each one of these independent variables. So can you comment on that? The second general comment for the panelists is obviously how these small countries respond to China depends in a large part what China does, right? And none of you discussed, right? The Chinese actions and policies during the period within which you were examining the foreign policy behavior of your own country. Is it because you are assuming that China's actions and policies did not change during that time? I want you to comment on that as well. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. So first, I think Chenchoy, and then the second question, you can take it. And how about the third question? Maybe Durgana-san or the first, Chenchoy.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Yongwoo, my friend, for your excellent, as usual, penetrating question. Cut long story short is that the fiscal, I mentioned briefly about the kind of the risk of fiscal burdens and also that issue. And this is clearly something that came up quite strongly during the fieldwork. Some policy elites, without using those words, they did reflect, some kind of like concern over that. So that clearly is a risk. But to answer your question, and this is where the legitimation issue comes in a sense that elites certainly in Vientiane and many other places certainly see those fiscal challenges. Those are a risk that they will have to face in one way or another. But because of the legitimation or the performance-based legitimation is so important that they tend to downplay that risk and outplay in their eyes. They are seeing other risks that are politically more profound and more pressing, which push Lao elite after a few years consideration to eventually go ahead. The groundbreaking session was actually postponed, right? From we know that from early and then eventually in 2016. That showed that there was a hesitation. There was a deep even debate. Of course, it's closed door, we won't know, but it was certainly an issue that was in the mind of the ruling elite. But eventually, as I said, for legitimation issue, they downplay that risk, but they outplay many other risks that are certainly politically more important. For example, the issue of their authority to rule will be eroded, right? And during, not just for this project, early on, your colleague Selena Ho and I, together with our former teacher, David Lampton, we spent 5 years working on the book project that eventually was published in 2020, Rivers of Iron. So that title was very much a reflection from the Lao elite. They will want to say that because Lao is such a landlocked country, they are hoping to use this infrastructure project, railroad, as a river of a civilization, river of development, and eventually river for political purposes that they are trying to make sure that they will be politically relevant. So this infrastructure will be key that allowed them, then they are hoping to turn into not just economic opportunities, but also political relevance. And therefore, they downplay the economic and also fiscal risk and all that. Yeah, thank you.
Second question.
About the last question, just 30 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. just, I think in September 2022, I was here and there was another presentation about Lao-China relationship. And then the idea that is emerging from Laos is that they no longer see or want to see themselves as landlocked, rather land-linked. And that is how they use this, railway project. So a number of countries, for example, Nepal, Bhutan, and Bhutan not so much, but some other such countries who see geography as a barrier to their development, they increasingly see themselves or want to turn themselves into land linked so that they can use their potential to 100%. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the second question and third question, Alvin.
So thank you for your questions. So I agree that overdetermination is a problem. But classically, overdetermination only matters if you're really asking why questions. And then that sort of you're looking at, and why questions really get at the issue of which factors matter more in this particular case than others. I can't speak for the other papers, but my paper is a how paper. How papers usually are process-based papers, which is about explaining how do these mechanisms manifest and how do they translate into outcomes. And then in the future, since the mechanisms have been established, it becomes possible then to pursue a paper which is more similar to, I think, what you're asking, which is like, why does a particular leader, why did this particular leader choose, and which factor is more important? So generally speaking, that's for social science methods. For the question of like number two, I agree with you. The China factor matters. And again, I can't speak for the other papers, but in my paper, I incorporated what China does across time empirically within the three factors which I've actually talked about. And you can actually see it much more in the paper. Definitely did not have time as I stuck to 10 minutes in my presentation. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. And I have two more questions. And the first question is, how does the expansion of the BRICS will impact China's cooperation with other developing countries and ongoing and future convergence with OECD DAC members? This is the first. And the second question is, how do you think about China's role in challenging in climate change issues over your case countries' regions? So do anyone would like to respond to these two questions?
Maybe I can
Change it?
share.
Okay.
Maybe I can
Please.
share some quick points about the first question about the BRIC issue, right? BRICS issue. I think 2 points can be quickly highlighted. First is that I think many of us are not aware of whether BRICS actually offer any alternative connectivity cooperation, right? I mean, Japan does have partnership for quality infrastructure and all that, but BRICS itself doesn't have. And then there are other factors as other alternative in the case of we know like Quad have the Build Back Better World. A Blue Dot network, and the Build Back Better World is very much a G7 and all that. So I think the alternative is not so much BRICS, but many other countries. And then the second point very quickly would be, and we do know that in fact within BRICS members, even the expanded one, is ambivalent about China's project, right? India, for example, it's a very cautious negative about BRI, but India also take a position where it supports AIIB and take part very actively in AIIB. So it's not straightforward. Yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Well, regarding BRICS, I think, as we know, China has this ambition to be globally presented and to get equally engaged in all these like sub-regional and between regions and global initiatives. So I don't think it will somehow impact the less than one, I don't know, presence in one initiative to be more there, etc. So I think they tend to coordinate all these initiatives, and of course they are complex and they changes along the road. Be more cautious, smaller projects, environmentally more carefully. based, and we know that Chinese president declared at the General Assembly of UN that they will not finance any further fossil fuel energy projects within the BRI initiative, Belt and Road Initiative. Probably they will, as in Serbia, they will finish what they've started, but not get engaged in any new one. Second question. Yes, of course, as I said, China changes and it adjusted, but it's Chinese way, just throw out some huge initiative, but then we will see how it will operate individually within the, and I think they've learned a lot, as we know, how important is the voice of local communities, different, and how it could be geopolitically challenged with the changes of governments, with the rebels, and they have human losses, as we know, in Pakistan, and how they should be more cautious when it comes to lend money to projects that cannot be paid out, and governments that could not maybe easily pay back, but they demand. And we know the Paris Club had a big problem to engage China within the group because they were so eager not to let anybody just go without paying back. So I think they also learned a lot along the way and matured in that way during the process, because my personal assessment is that China wanted to do a lot and to behave like a mature global power, but it takes time to really become again one. So they also learned a lot. Thank you.
So about the BRICS question, I have three short answers. I think number one, BRICS does not have political institution. There's no like governing body. It's an informal body, and therefore it is difficult to sort of foresee how it would sort of like replace an OECD DAC. Number two, BRICS in a way is sort of redundant. Even the expanded version, it's like another version of the G20, except that there are different members. And number three, BRICS does encourage monetary exchanges amongst members. The problem is the two biggest economies in BRICS are Russia and China. There's not a lot of incentive right now to acquire Russian ruble. And when it comes to the yuan, it is useful, but it is also not convertible. So it does limit the usefulness as well. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, trade with Russia in ruble and in ruble.
Thank you so much. Using rest of time, I would like to make another round. And as I said, that there are lots of implications from us. So maybe you have last comments response, including your recommendation to Japan. Is it okay? So starting from Sensei?
This is a great question that I thought all of us should use 3 hours to respond. Since we do have 3 hours, so very quick point, I guess would be, this is something that it was mentioned earlier about the issue of external alternatives. Yeah, I think it's human nature and countries' interests to actually want to diversify. And we want to diversify, especially on this developmental connectivity cooperation. No country, unless they do not have alternative. No country, no actors, rational actors, want to put, as we mentioned, put all eggs in any basket. And this is nothing personal. It's all about anti or pro any country, but it's only natural. We want to diversify. And Japan is unique in this sense, because when it comes to infrastructure cooperation, we all, many in Southeast Asia, we all remember that Japan was actually a pioneering and also a key developmental partner when it comes to infrastructure in Southeast Asia. Even back in 1970s, 1980s, Japan already a big player when it comes to these issues. But over time, of course, many issues are kind of expanded, and Japan's role is not as active as before. But I think many countries still look upon Japan to provide, the kind of role that can help them to diversify, and we can also maximize this opportunity from different external actors. Thank you.
Much, Durgana-san, so only 1 minute for each.
Yes, thank you. Well, of course, Japan established itself as a generous nation that wants to share its results of hard work of generations of its citizens and the fruits of it. And it is well appreciated globally, I think, in Serbia especially. Although we, regarding the level of the income, cannot receive most of the grants, but we did receive a lot of grants, and there is no like a political incentive why Japan was helping Serbia, but Japan did, and it is much appreciated by our citizens, and that help is always focused to be used by everybody, like a medical equipment, and it's very transparent and very easily recognized by citizens as really gift as a public good to upgrade the quality of living of citizens. Of course, I don't like to give political, especially unpaid political advices to foreign governments, but I would like to see Japan being more free and itself and self-assured when it comes to foreign policy than just following some not that popular major powers. Thank you.
1 minute itself is a challenge for me, but I'll just like to point out that we are living in a time of geopolitical fragility, as Professor Shiga-san started, by saying that countries are faced with limited choices. Countries have limited resources, and countries who used to receive infrastructure-related resources especially from Western institutions, Western countries, those are shrinking, those are drying up, and that is where China has emerged as Professor Quick pointed out, that a tangible difference, right? Something that mark of China is left in these countries, but also in case of Bangladesh specifically, China has been using its infrastructure as a political and strategic decision as well. Two of the very important sort of infrastructure projects were at the last minute were termed as not beneficial for China, and therefore they were scraped off. Later on, we could see that local researchers found out those would have been politically and strategically more beneficial to India. So China is also playing its infrastructure strategic politics in South Asia, and same with other countries. If we pay close attention, so we need to see that the areas that China has been able to occupy and present itself as almost irreplaceable. But countries like, as I mentioned during my talk, Japan is coming up with a different kind of projects. It came up with Big B, and then it has also doing MIDI, multimodal Matarbari integrated multimodal project, and South Korea is coming up. Some other countries will also in future come up, and Indo-Pacific and especially FOIP, it has been extremely eye-opening sort of era for this region. As a number of writers have written, Easternization of the world is not merely is a saying anymore. Thank you.
Lastly, Arvin.
Okay, thank you very much. So what my paper would highlight for the Japanese government is the importance of politics, the importance of domestic politics. And it's a question of how will the Japanese government contend with different administrations and different elites taking power in different countries, one after another. In my book under contract at Columbia University, one of my arguments is that the Chinese tends to work with the leaders in power, the regime, and when they actually go in a country, they actually don't build relationships with opposition leaders, and they tend to be flexible with what leaders do in terms of like building projects like Kaliwa Dam in the Philippines, Jakarta Bandung Railway, the Bonten Vientiane Railway, for instance. The Japanese government has done a good job having relationships with opposition, with, I would say, like the government, and that actually allows stability in terms of Japanese presence in Southeast Asia and many parts of the world. I would argue there's a need to ramp up the good work that Japan is doing, and I'm going to end it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists and Shiga-san, for our lively discussion. So I would like to end this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for wonderful discussion. It was really thought-provoking. And finally, we would like to invite Professor Takahara for the final comment to wrap up today's symposium.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank everybody to make this session such a lively one. For me, time just flew. And I think all of us feel that we need a lot more time to go even deeper into the very important topics that we touched on today. And thank you for all the questions that were provided from the floor and online also. A few points to make. I would like to first echo what Alvin Kamba said at the end, that, in all the countries, domestic politics were found to be very important. So good analysis of the political processes, or the policy, the analysis of the policy processes in each country is so important. I've been arguing when I was director of the Ogata Sadako Research Institute that, international cooperation is politics. Don't forget, it's a political economy, all right. So we need to do a better job in analyzing the policy processes of these developing countries, and we will find more actors involved. It's not only the government, or even the government. There are many actors in that too. That's the first point to make. And the second point is, I echo what my friend Liu Yongbok said. And I said this at the outset too. We need to look into China too. We have to do an analysis of the policy process in China, and then we will find different ideas, different interests that are involved in their international cooperation projects. Perhaps we will find a tussle or a tug of war between general contractors, the construction firms who would like to do infrastructure projects, and the banks and the fiscal departments in China who would like to have a better feasible study before they embark on those big projects. Now, last year at the third International Forum on the Belt and Road Initiative, President Xi announced that from now on, they will do more projects that are small and beautiful. It's a big change, epoch-making. The Chinese character for beauty is a combination of Chinese character for sheep and Chinese character for big. So always in China, big is better, big is more beautiful. But now they're trying to change the idea of what's beautiful. Okay, then what is the politics behind that? Or what is the political economy behind that? We need to know, we need to understand better China. And also, as far as China is concerned, we should not judge China by their policy documents only, by their words only. We have to look at their implementation. And that makes it all the more important that such empirical analysis is done in the recipient nations. So we would like to continue with such research in the future. And the final point I would make is, please read the papers. The papers are very rich in content, and you will understand what we were discussing better by going through all the articles that are now uploaded, including the papers by the Japanese team, who, which provide the supporting research that would highlight many points that are included in the papers written by our international team. So with that, I would like to end this session. I think Orita-san will have the final word, but anyway, thank you so much once again.